In a quiet little town surrounded by rolling hills and friendly neighbors, the Johnson family was well known for their kindness and hard work. They were the kind of people who always helped others, whether it was lending a hand during tough times or sharing food on holidays. Everyone in the town respected them, especially Mr. James Johnson, the father of the family. He had spent his entire life building a successful business and raising two wonderful children, Marcus, his son, and Sarah, his daughter. Though Marcus was black and Sarah was white, their bond as siblings was unbreakable. Their father had taught them to treat everyone equally, no matter their race, background, or circumstances. But when Mr. Johnson passed away suddenly one winter morning, everything changed. His death left a deep void not just in the hearts of his children, but also in the structure of their lives. Without him, the family felt lost, like a ship without a captain. The siblings leaned on each other for support, hoping that their father's will would guide them through this difficult time. After all, Mr. Johnson had always been fair and thoughtful. He wouldn't leave anything unresolved, would he? The person responsible for reading the will was none other than Harold Grayson, the family lawyer. Harold had been a close friend of Mr. Johnson for over 30 years. He had handled every legal matter for the family, from property deals to estate planning. To Marcus and Sarah, Harold wasn't just a lawyer. He was almost like an uncle. They trusted him completely, never doubting his intentions or questioning his decisions. Little did they know, Harold had been plotting something sinister. Harold had watched the Johnson family grow over the years. He had seen how much Mr. Johnson loved his children and how proud he was of both Marcus and Sarah. But Harold had also noticed something else, something darker. Over time, greed had taken root in his heart. At first, it was small things, like charging the Johnsons slightly higher fees than necessary. But as the years went by, Harold began to imagine what it would be like to have access to their wealth. And now, with Mr. Johnson gone, Harold saw an opportunity to act on his greed. On the day of the will reading, Marcus and Sarah sat nervously in Harold's office. The room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains blocking out the sunlight. Harold sat behind his desk, wearing his usual calm expression. He cleared his throat and began reading the document aloud. According to the will, most of Mr. Johnson's fortune, a staggering amount worth millions, was to be donated to charity. The family home would go to Sarah, along with a significant portion of the remaining assets. As for Marcus, he was left only a modest sum of money, barely enough to cover a few months of expenses. Marcus felt a sharp pang of betrayal. He couldn't believe his father would do this to him. Hadn't he worked just as hard as Sarah? Hadn't he shown the same dedication to the family? Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he nodded silently, accepting what he believed was his father's final wish. Sarah, too, seemed surprised but said nothing. She hugged her brother tightly, promising to help him however she could. What Marcus didn't realize was that Harold had lied. The real will, carefully written by Mr. Johnson himself, stated that the inheritance should be divided equally between his two children. There was no mention of donating the majority of the estate to charity. Harold had forged the document, altering its contents to suit his own selfish desires. He knew Marcus wouldn't question him because of their long-standing relationship. And even if Marcus did suspect something, Harold figured he wouldn't have the means or resources to challenge him legally. As the days passed, Marcus tried to make sense of what had happened. He replayed memories of his father in his mind, searching for clues that might explain the unequal distribution. But nothing added up. His father had always treated him and Sarah the same way, never showing favoritism toward either of them. Why? Would he suddenly change his mind? Sarah, on the other hand, seemed less troubled by the situation. She busied herself with renovating the family home, turning it into her dream house. When Marcus asked her about the will, she shrugged it off, saying, "Dad must have had his reasons." Her dismissive attitude frustrated Marcus, but he didn't push the issue. He didn't want to create tension between them, especially after losing their father. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Harold was growing increasingly nervous. He had expected everything to go smoothly, but there was something about Marcus's quiet demeanor that made him uneasy. Harold couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus might start digging deeper, uncovering the truth behind the altered will. To protect himself, Harold began destroying any evidence that could link him to the forgery. He shredded old documents, deleted emails, and erased digital files from his computer. But no matter how careful he thought he was, Harold failed to notice one crucial detail: the attic of the Johnson family home. Hidden away in a dusty corner of the attic was an old file cabinet filled with papers from Mr. Johnson's past. Among these documents was a handwritten note addressed to Harold. It read, "Ensure the inheritance is split equally between my children. No favoritism." These words sent chills down Marcus's spine when he stumbled upon them weeks later. For the first time since his father's death, Marcus began to suspect that something wasn't right. If his father had wanted equality, then why had the will been so unfair? Determined to uncover the truth, Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to a private investigator named Linda Carter, known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice. Together, they began piecing together evidence against Harold, unaware of the dramatic events that lay ahead. Karma, it seemed, was already waiting, and it wasn't going to let Harold get away with his deceit. For now, though, Marcus remained focused on finding answers. He refused to let anger or bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into seeking justice, not just for himself but for his father's memory. As he delved deeper into the mystery, Marcus realized that this journey would test his strength, resilience, and faith in humanity. But one thing was certain: the truth would eventually come to light, and Harold would face the consequences of his actions. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The more he thought about the will, the less it made sense. His father had always been a man of fairness and integrity. He had taught Marcus and Sarah from a young age that equality mattered above all else. So why would he leave such an uneven distribution of his wealth? It didn't align with the values he had instilled in them throughout their lives. At first, Marcus tried to convince himself that maybe his father had reasons he didn't understand. Perhaps there were debts or obligations Marcus wasn't aware of. Or maybe Mr. Johnson had wanted to support charities close to his heart. But no matter how hard Marcus tried to justify the situation, the nagging doubt lingered. Something deep inside told him that this wasn't right. Determined to find answers, Marcus started asking questions carefully at first. He spoke to family friends who had known his father well, hoping they might shed some light on the matter. Most of them expressed shock when they heard about the will. "Your dad loved you both equally," one friend said. "He talked about how proud he was of you and Sarah all the time. I can't imagine him doing anything differently." These conversations only fueled Marcus's suspicions. If his father truly believed in equal treatment, then why had the inheritance been so lopsided? Marcus began to wonder if someone else had influenced the decision. Someone like Harold Grayson. Harold had been part of the Johnson family's life for decades. He had been there during birthdays, holidays, and even personal crises. To Marcus, Harold wasn't just a lawyer. He was almost like a second father figure. That's why it was so hard for Marcus to entertain the idea that Harold could be involved in something dishonest. Yet, as the days went by, Marcus found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the man. One afternoon, while visiting the old family home to help Sarah sort through their father's belongings, Marcus decided to take a closer look around. The house was filled with memories, photos on the walls, books on the shelves, and furniture that had been in the family for generations. As he wandered through the rooms, Marcus felt a mix of sadness and nostalgia. But then, something caught his eye. In the attic, tucked away behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old photo albums, stood a dusty file cabinet. Its paint was chipped, and its drawers squeaked loudly when opened. Curious, Marcus began rifling through the contents. Inside, he found stacks of papers, tax documents, bank statements, and legal records dating back decades. At first glance, none of it seemed particularly important. But then, buried beneath layers of yellowed documents, Marcus discovered something shocking. It was a handwritten note from his father addressed to Harold Grayson. The handwriting was unmistakably Mr. Johnson's. In clear, concise words, the note read, "Ensure the inheritance is split equally between my children. No favoritism." Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. This single piece of paper contradicted everything Harold had told him during the reading of the will. If his father had explicitly instructed Harold to divide the estate equally, then why had Harold lied? For a moment, Marcus felt overwhelmed. He sat down on the floor of the attic, staring at the note in disbelief. Could Harold really have tampered with the will? And if so, why? What possible motive could he have for betraying the trust of a family he had known for so long? Determined to get to the bottom of things, Marcus took the note with him and showed it to Sarah later that evening. She examined it carefully, her brow furrowed in confusion. "This doesn't make sense," she said finally. "If Dad wanted us to share the inheritance equally, then why did Harold say otherwise?" "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "But I intend to find out." Sarah hesitated, unsure of what to say. On one hand, she trusted Marcus and believed he wouldn't make accusations without good reason. On the other hand, the idea of confronting Harold felt daunting. After all, he had been a part of their lives for as long as they could remember. Accusing him of lying, even fraud, was a serious step. "We need proof," Sarah said after a long pause. "This note alone isn't enough. We need concrete evidence before we accuse anyone." Marcus agreed. He knew that accusing Harold without solid proof would only lead to chaos. But where could he find the evidence he needed? The answer came to him late that night as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. If Harold had indeed altered the will, then he must have left traces somewhere. Financial records, emails, or even drafts of the original document. All Marcus had to do was dig deep enough to uncover them. The next morning, Marcus hired a private investigator named Linda Carter. Linda was known in the community for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice. Her reputation preceded her, and Marcus hoped she could help him unravel the mystery surrounding his father's will. During their initial meeting, Marcus explained the situation in detail, showing her the handwritten note and sharing his suspicions about Harold. Linda listened intently, nodding occasionally as she jotted down notes. When Marcus finished speaking, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "This is a complex case," she said slowly. "But based on what you've told me, it's definitely worth investigating further. Let's start by looking into Harold's recent financial activities. People who commit fraud often leave trails, especially when large sums of money are involved." Over the next few weeks, Linda worked tirelessly to gather information. She combed through public records, interviewed former clients of Harold's law firm, and analyzed financial transactions linked to his accounts. Meanwhile, Marcus kept a close watch on Harold, observing his behavior for any signs of guilt. At first, Harold seemed oblivious to Marcus's growing suspicion. He continued going about his daily routine, attending meetings, and handling cases as usual. But gradually, subtle changes began to emerge. Harold became increasingly distant, avoiding phone calls from Marcus and canceling scheduled appointments without explanation. When Marcus did manage to catch him in person, Harold appeared nervous, fidgeting with his tie and avoiding direct eye contact. These small details may have gone unnoticed by others, but to Marcus they were glaring red flags. One evening, as Harold sat alone in his office, he received an anonymous letter in the mail. Inside was a photocopy of the handwritten note Marcus had found in the attic. Beneath it, scrawled in bold letters, was a chilling message. "The truth always comes out." Harold's hands trembled as he read the words over and over again. Who had sent this? How had they gotten hold of the note? Panic set in as Harold realized he was being watched. Desperate to cover his tracks, Harold began destroying any remaining evidence that could link him to the forged will. He shredded documents, deleted emails, and wiped his computer clean. But despite his efforts, karma was already setting its wheels in motion. Little did Harold know, Linda Carter had uncovered damning proof of his crimes, and she was preparing to expose him once and for all. As Marcus waited anxiously for updates from Linda, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey he had embarked upon. What started as a simple quest for answers had turned into a battle against deception and greed. Yet through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. He refused to let anger or bitterness consume him. Instead, he focused on seeking justice, not just for himself but for his father's legacy. Karma, it seemed, was working silently in the background, ensuring that those who strayed from the path of honesty would eventually face the consequences of their actions. For now, Marcus held on to hope, knowing that the truth was within reach. And when it finally came to light, it would change everything, for better or worse. As Marcus and Linda Carter dug deeper into the case, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Each discovery brought them closer to unraveling Harold Grayson's web of deceit, but it also heightened the tension. The stakes were high, not just for Marcus, who sought justice for his family, but also for Harold, whose carefully constructed lies were starting to crumble under scrutiny. Linda's investigation revealed some unsettling patterns in Harold's financial records. Over the past year, large sums of money had been deposited into Harold's personal bank accounts, cash transactions that couldn't be traced back to any legitimate source. These deposits coincided with the timeline of Mr. Johnson's death and the execution of the will. To make matters worse, several former clients of Harold's came forward with similar stories of being misled or exploited financially. One woman claimed that Harold had convinced her to sign over a portion of her late husband's estate to him under false pretenses. Another man accused Harold of altering legal documents to benefit himself. The evidence was mounting, and Linda knew they were onto something big. But proving Harold's involvement in the forgery of Mr. Johnson's will would require more than circumstantial proof. They needed concrete evidence, a smoking gun, that directly linked Harold to the crime. And so, Linda devised a plan to catch Harold off guard. Meanwhile, Harold's paranoia reached new heights. Ever since receiving the anonymous letter containing the photocopy of Mr. Johnson's handwritten note, he hadn't slept properly. His mind raced with questions. Who had sent it? How much did they know? Was Marcus behind this? Every knock on his office door made him jump, and every phone call felt like a potential threat. He became increasingly erratic, canceling meetings at the last minute and avoiding social gatherings altogether. Even his colleagues noticed the change in his behavior, whispering among themselves about what might be troubling him. One evening, as Harold sat alone in his dimly lit office, he decided to take drastic measures. He gathered all the remaining incriminating documents from his desk drawers, drafts of the altered will, copies of falsified bank statements, and correspondence related to the case, and stuffed them into a cardboard box. Then, armed with a pair of scissors and a shredder, he began destroying the evidence piece by piece. But fate has a way of intervening when least expected. As Harold worked late into the night, fatigue got the better of him. In his haste to dispose of the documents, he accidentally knocked over a lamp sitting on his desk. The bulb shattered, sending sparks flying across the room. Within moments, a small fire erupted, fueled by stacks of paper scattered around the office. Smoke filled the air as flames licked at the walls, quickly spreading out of control. Harold panicked, grabbing the box of shredded documents and rushing toward the exit. But the smoke was thick, making it hard to see or breathe. Coughing violently, he stumbled through the hallway, barely managing to escape before the sprinklers activated, drenching everything in sight. By the time firefighters arrived, the blaze had caused significant damage to the building, particularly to Harold's office. The incident drew immediate attention from local authorities. Fire investigators combed through the charred remains, trying to determine the cause of the fire. At first glance, it appeared accidental, an electrical malfunction or human error. However, upon closer inspection, they discovered something unusual. Among the debris were fragments of partially burned papers bearing traces of text. Though incomplete, these scraps hinted at illegal activity involving finances and forged documents. Word of the fire spread quickly through the community, sparking rumors about Harold's involvement. Clients who had once trusted him began pulling away, canceling appointments and seeking alternative representation. Rumors circulated that Harold might have started the fire himself to destroy evidence. While no one could prove it yet, the damage to his reputation was undeniable. Business dwindled, and soon Harold found himself isolated, both professionally and personally. Back at Linda Carter's office, Marcus listened intently as she updated him on the latest developments. The fire may have destroyed some of the evidence, Linda explained, but not all of it. Investigators recovered enough fragments to raise serious questions about Harold's activities. Plus, we still have the financial records and witnessing testimonies linking him to fraud. Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of relief and determination. Relief because the truth was finally coming to light, and determination because he knew the fight wasn't over yet. Harold wouldn't go down without a fight, and Marcus needed to stay vigilant. As the days passed, pressure mounted on Harold. Not only was his law practice crumbling, but he was also under constant surveillance by investigators. Every move he made was scrutinized, every transaction flagged for review. It was only a matter of time before the full extent of his crimes was exposed. Desperate to salvage what little he had left, Harold attempted to flee town. He packed a suitcase, withdrew cash from his accounts, and booked a one-way ticket to a distant city. But karma works in mysterious ways. Just as Harold was about to board his flight, airport security flagged his name during routine checks. Authorities detained him, citing suspicions of financial misconduct. Harold protested, claiming innocence, but the weight of the evidence against him was overwhelming. While Harold languished in custody awaiting formal charges, Marcus reflected on the events that had unfolded. From the moment he found the handwritten note in the attic, he had known the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Yet despite the challenges, he had persevered. With Linda's help, he had uncovered the truth and ensured that Harold would face justice for his actions. For Marcus, this victory wasn't just about reclaiming his rightful inheritance. It was about restoring his faith in fairness and integrity. His father had always taught him to stand up for what was right, no matter how difficult the journey might be. Now Marcus understood those lessons better than ever. Karma, it seemed, had already begun its work. Harold's greed and dishonesty had led to his downfall, leaving him with nothing but regret and shame. Meanwhile, Marcus emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to honor his father's legacy. The battle wasn't entirely won yet, but Marcus could feel the tide turning in his favor. Justice, slow though it may be, was finally within reach. The fire that destroyed Harold Grayson's office was more than just an accident. It was the beginning of his unraveling. What started as a desperate attempt to erase his crimes turned into a chain reaction that exposed every lie he had ever told. The flames may have consumed much of the physical evidence, but karma has a way of ensuring that no wrongdoing goes unpunished. Harold's life spiraled out of control in the days following the fire. Investigators combed through the wreckage of his office, piecing together fragments of documents and analyzing the remnants of his shredded files. Though the fire had damaged many papers, some scraps survived, bearing traces of incriminating information. These fragments included handwritten notes referencing Mr. Johnson's estate, altered will drafts, and suspicious financial transactions. Slowly but surely, the investigators began connecting the dots. Meanwhile, word of the fire spread like wildfire throughout the small town. People whispered about Harold's sudden misfortune, speculating about what might have caused it. Some believed it was divine retribution for his dishonesty, while others thought he had set the fire himself to cover his tracks. Either way, the incident cast a dark shadow over Harold's reputation. Clients who once trusted him with their most sensitive legal matters now questioned his integrity. One by one, they abandoned him, taking their business elsewhere. His law practice, once thriving and respected, crumbled into ruins almost overnight. But the worst was yet to come. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered discrepancies in Harold's financial records. Large cash deposits, made shortly after Mr. Johnson's death, raised eyebrows. Bank statements showed unexplained transfers and withdrawals that couldn't be accounted for. When confronted, Harold stammered and fumbled for excuses, claiming the money came from legitimate sources. But without proper documentation to back up his claims, his explanations sounded hollow and implausible. Desperate to escape the mounting pressure, Harold made plans to flee the town. He packed a suitcase, withdrew what little cash remained in his accounts, and booked a flight to a distant city where he hoped to start anew. But fate intervened once again. Just as Harold was about to board his plane, airport security flagged his name during routine checks. Authorities detained him on suspicion of financial misconduct, citing the ongoing investigation into his activities. Harold protested loudly, insisting he was innocent, but the evidence against him was too damning to ignore. News of Harold's arrest shocked the community. Friends, colleagues, and former clients struggled to reconcile the image of the man they thought they knew with the reality of his crimes. For Marcus, however, it was a moment of vindication. All the sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and relentless pursuit of the truth had finally paid off. Harold's downfall proved that justice, though delayed, would eventually prevail. With Harold behind bars, Marcus and Linda Carter focused on rebuilding the case against him. They gathered testimonies from people who had been affected by his deceit, including former clients who accused him of exploiting them financially. One woman tearfully recounted how Harold had convinced her to sign over her late husband's estate to him under false pretenses. Another man described how Harold had forged documents to secure a larger share of a family inheritance for himself. Each story added weight to the growing mountain of evidence. In court, the prosecution presented a compelling case against Harold. Linda Carter skillfully argued that Harold had not only tampered with Mr. Johnson's will, but had also engaged in a pattern of fraudulent behavior, targeting vulnerable individuals. She highlighted the financial discrepancies, the recovered document fragments, and the testimonies of those harmed by his actions. The judge listened intently, clearly troubled by the extent of Harold's deceit. Throughout the trial, Harold maintained his innocence, claiming he was being framed. But his defense lacked substance, relying heavily on vague denials and unfounded accusations. As the evidence mounted, it became increasingly clear that Harold's lies were unraveling before everyone's eyes. Even his own lawyer seemed reluctant to defend him, knowing the overwhelming nature of the case against him. For Marcus, sitting in the courtroom was both painful and cathartic. Hearing the details of Harold's crimes brought back memories of the betrayal he had felt when he first learned about the altered will. Yet, at the same time, it gave him a sense of closure. Justice wasn't just about punishing Harold. It was about honoring his father's legacy and restoring the fairness that had been stolen from him. When the verdict was finally announced, there was a collective sigh of relief in the courtroom. Harold was found guilty of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The judge sentenced him to several years in prison and ordered him to pay restitution to his victims, including Marcus. The original will was reinstated, ensuring that Marcus received his rightful share of the inheritance. For Marcus, this victory wasn't just about reclaiming wealth, it was about reclaiming trust, dignity, and peace of mind. As Harold was led away in handcuffs, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the moment he discovered the handwritten note in the attic to the day Harold was sentenced, every step had tested his resolve. There were times when doubt crept in, when frustration threatened to overwhelm him, and when fear of failure loomed large. But through it all, Marcus had stayed true to his mission, driven by the belief that the truth would eventually come to light. Karma, it seemed, had delivered its judgment swiftly and decisively. Harold's greed and dishonesty had cost him everything: his career, his freedom, and the respect of those around him. In contrast, Marcus emerged stronger and wiser, having faced adversity head-on and triumphed. He realized that life operates on a delicate balance, rewarding honesty and punishing wrongdoing in its own time. Though the legal battle was over, Marcus knew there was still work to be done. He wanted to use his inheritance not just for personal gain, but to make a difference in the lives of others. Inspired by his father's values, he decided to establish a foundation aimed at helping families navigate complex legal challenges. Through this initiative, Marcus hoped to prevent others from falling victim to the kind of exploitation he had endured. For now, however, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He visited his father's grave, standing silently as he shared the news of Harold's conviction. "Dad," he said softly, "justice has been served. Your legacy lives on." Tears welled up in his eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. For the first time in months, Marcus felt at peace, knowing that he had honored his father's memory and upheld the principles he stood for. Karma, as unpredictable as it may seem, always finds a way to restore balance. And for Marcus, that knowledge was enough to carry him forward into a brighter future. The courtroom was silent except for the rhythmic tapping of the judge's gavel as he prepared to deliver his final verdict. Marcus sat upright in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. Beside him, Linda Carter exuded calm confidence, her sharp eyes fixed on the judge. Across the room, Harold Grayson slumped in his seat, his face pale and drawn. The once respected lawyer looked like a shadow of his former self, a man brought low by his own greed and deceit. The trial had been long and grueling, filled with emotional testimonies, damning evidence, and heated arguments. Witnesses recounted how Harold had manipulated them, forging documents and siphoning funds for his personal gain. Financial records revealed a pattern of fraudulent activity stretching back years. And then there was the centerpiece of the case, the altered will of Mr. James Johnson. The prosecution presented irrefutable proof that Harold had tampered with it, denying Marcus his rightful inheritance while enriching himself at the expense of the Johnson family. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried authority and finality. "Harold Grayson," he began, pausing briefly to survey the defendant, "you have been found guilty of multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Your actions not only betrayed the trust placed in you by your clients, but also violated the ethical standards expected of someone in your profession." The sentence came swiftly. Harold would serve 10 years in prison without parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay restitution to all his victims, including Marcus. The original will of Mr. James Johnson was declared valid, ensuring that Marcus and Sarah would inherit their father's estate equally. For Marcus, this ruling wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. It affirmed that honesty and fairness still mattered, even in a world where corruption often seemed rampant. As Harold was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Marcus felt a mix of emotions. Relief washed over him, knowing that Harold would no longer be able to harm anyone else. Satisfaction followed, as he realized that justice had finally caught up with the man who had wronged him so deeply. But beneath these feelings lay a quiet sadness. Marcus couldn't help but think about the years wasted worrying, doubting, and fighting against Harold's lies. His father's death should have been a time for mourning and reflection, not a battle for truth and fairness. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Marcus, eager to hear his thoughts on the verdict. Flashbulbs popped as cameras captured his every move. Instead of anger or bitterness, Marcus spoke with grace and humility. "This isn't about revenge," he said, firmly. "It's about making sure that people like Harold are held accountable for their actions. My father taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it may be. Today, I feel like we've honored his legacy." Sarah stood beside Marcus during the press conference, her arm linked with his. Their relationship had grown stronger throughout the ordeal. At first, she had been hesitant to confront Harold, fearing the consequences of challenging such a powerful figure. But seeing Marcus's determination and hearing the stories of others who had suffered because of Harold had changed her perspective. Together, they vowed to use their inheritance wisely, keeping their father's values alive. While Marcus celebrated the outcome of the trial, Harold faced a grim reality behind bars. Prison life was harsh and unforgiving, especially for someone accustomed to privilege and power. Gone were the days of tailored suits, luxurious vacations, and commanding respect. Now Harold wore drab uniforms, ate bland food, and lived under constant surveillance. He spent sleepless nights replaying his mistakes in his mind, haunted by guilt and regret. Inmates quickly learned about Harold's crimes, and he became a target of ridicule. Some mocked him for stealing from grieving families, while others demanded repayment for their own losses. Guards treated him with disdain, viewing him as a disgrace to the legal profession. Isolated and humiliated, Harold struggled to adapt to his new environment. He wrote letters to friends and colleagues, pleading for support, but most ignored him. Those who responded offered little comfort, reminding him that he had brought this fate upon himself. Back in town, news of Harold's imprisonment sparked widespread discussion. Many residents expressed relief that justice had been served, while others reflected on the broader implications of his crimes. Teachers used the case as a cautionary tale in classrooms, warning students about the dangers of greed and dishonesty. Local newspapers published editorials calling for stricter oversight of lawyers and financial advisors, urging reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. For Marcus, the aftermath of the trial marked a turning point. With the legal battle behind him, he turned his attention to rebuilding his life. He decided to channel his inheritance into meaningful work, inspired by his father's lifelong commitment to helping others. Using part of the money, Marcus founded the James Johnson Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to assisting underprivileged families navigate complex legal processes. Whether it was drafting wills, resolving disputes, or securing custody rights, the foundation aimed to provide free or affordable services to those who couldn't afford traditional representation. Linda Carter played a key role in shaping the foundation's mission. Having witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by unethical practices, she believed strongly in creating systemic change. She joined Marcus as an advisor, using her expertise to develop programs that educated communities about their legal rights. Together, they organized workshops, distributed informational pamphlets, and collaborated with local leaders to raise awareness about issues of trust and transparency. Through the foundation, Marcus found a renewed sense of purpose. Each success story, from reuniting estranged siblings to helping single mothers secure child support payments, reminded him why he had fought so hard for justice. He saw glimpses of his father in everything he did, honoring his memory by continuing the work he loved. Sarah, too, embraced the opportunity to contribute. She sold the family home and used the proceeds to fund scholarships for students pursuing careers in law and social justice. Her goal was to inspire a new generation of ethical professionals who would prioritize integrity over profit. Though she and Marcus had different approaches, their shared vision united them in purpose. Meanwhile, karma continued its subtle yet undeniable work. Harold's downfall rippled outward, affecting everyone he had touched. Former clients reclaimed what was rightfully theirs thanks to investigations spurred by his arrest. Associates who had turned a blind eye to his misconduct faced scrutiny themselves, prompting some to reform their ways. Even Harold's family distanced themselves from him, unable to reconcile his betrayal with the image of the man they thought they knew. Years later, when Harold was finally released from prison, he returned to a world that had moved on without him. His name was tarnished beyond repair, and few people remembered him fondly. Struggling to rebuild his life, he took odd jobs to make ends meet, living modestly in a small apartment. Though he never admitted his guilt publicly, Harold privately acknowledged the error of his ways. In moments of solitude, he reflected on the choices that had led him to ruin, vowing to live differently, if only for himself. For Marcus, however, life moved forward in brighter directions. He remarried, started a family, and continued expanding the foundation's reach. Every milestone reminded him of how far he had come since discovering that handwritten note in the attic. He often told his children stories about their grandfather, emphasizing the importance of fairness, resilience, and compassion. Justice, Marcus learned, wasn't always swift, but it was inevitable. Karma worked quietly in the background, balancing scales tipped by greed and dishonesty. And though the journey had been difficult, it had ultimately strengthened him, teaching lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. As he looked toward the future, Marcus felt hopeful, not just for himself, but for the countless lives he hoped to impact through his work. The years that followed Harold's conviction brought profound changes for everyone involved. For Marcus, the end of the legal battle marked not just the closing of a painful chapter, but also the beginning of a transformative journey. The foundation he had created in his father's name, the James Johnson Foundation, became a beacon of hope for countless families struggling with legal challenges. What started as a personal mission to honor his father's legacy grew into something far greater, a movement dedicated to restoring trust and fairness in a system often marred by greed and inequality. The foundation quickly gained traction, earning recognition from local leaders, community organizations, and even national media outlets. Its innovative approach combined education, advocacy, and direct assistance to empower individuals who might otherwise fall victim to exploitation. Workshops were held in schools, churches, and community centers, teaching people how to draft wills, navigate probate courts, and recognize signs of fraud. Free legal clinics provided consultations for low-income families, ensuring that no one was left without representation when they needed it most. Linda Carter remained a steadfast ally, dedicating her time and expertise to the foundation's growth. Her passion for justice inspired volunteers and donors alike, many of whom shared personal stories of hardship and triumph. Together, they built a network of support that extended beyond the small town where the Johnson family once lived. Within 5 years, the foundation had expanded to neighboring cities, reaching thousands of people each year. For Sarah, the experience had been equally transformative. Selling the family home had allowed her to fund scholarships for aspiring lawyers committed to ethical practices. These scholarships became highly competitive, attracting talented students eager to make a difference in their communities. Sarah took pride in mentoring recipients, sharing insights about integrity, empathy, and leadership. She often reminded them of her brother's perseverance, encouraging them to stand firm in the face of adversity. As the siblings worked together on various projects, their bond deepened further. They spoke openly about their father's values and how those principles guided their decisions. Though their methods differed, Marcus focusing on grassroots efforts and Sarah investing in future leaders, they shared a common goal: to leave the world better than they found it. Their collaboration served as a testament to the power of unity, proving that even siblings with different perspectives could achieve remarkable things when united by purpose. Harold Grayson, on the other hand, emerged from prison a changed man, but not necessarily for the better. Years of isolation and shame had taken their toll, leaving him bitter and disillusioned. Upon his release, he returned to find that the world had moved on without him. His law license was revoked permanently, making it impossible for him to practice again. Friends and former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose name had become synonymous with betrayal. Desperate for income, Harold took whatever jobs he could find, working long hours at minimum wage. He rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town, living quietly and avoiding attention. Despite his circumstances, Harold refused to admit fault publicly. In private moments, however, he wrestled with guilt and regret. He replayed memories of Mr. Johnson, recalling the trust the older man had placed in him. Those thoughts haunted him, serving as a constant reminder of the choices that had cost him everything. One day, while walking through the park, Harold spotted Marcus sitting on a bench. It was the first time they had seen each other since the trial. For a moment, Harold considered turning away, but something stopped him. Summoning what little courage he had left, he approached Marcus hesitantly. I wanted to say I'm sorry," Harold stammered, his voice trembling. "What I did was wrong. I know nothing can undo the harm I caused, but I truly am sorry." Marcus studied Harold silently, his expression unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. "Apologies don't fix everything," he said finally, his tone measured. "But they're a start. You hurt a lot of people, including me and my sister. If you're serious about changing, then prove it through your actions, not just words." Harold nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I understand," he whispered. "Thank you for hearing me out." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Though their encounter was brief, it marked a turning point for Harold. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, a chance, however slim, to rebuild his life. Back at the foundation, Marcus continued pushing boundaries, exploring new ways to address systemic issues within the legal system. One initiative focused on educating young children about fairness and equality, planting seeds of integrity early in life. Another program connected senior citizens with pro bono attorneys to protect them from predatory schemes. Each project reflected Marcus's unwavering commitment to creating a more just society. Sarah, meanwhile, expanded her scholarship program, partnering with universities to offer internships and mentorship opportunities. She encouraged recipients to give back to their communities, fostering a cycle of generosity and accountability. Many graduates went on to establish careers rooted in service, carrying forward the values instilled in them by Sarah and Marcus. As the years passed, the Johnson siblings became pillars of strength in their community. People admired not only their resilience but also their ability to turn tragedy into triumph. Their story served as a powerful reminder that adversity, though painful, can lead to growth if approached with courage and determination. Karma, as unpredictable as it may seem, always finds a way to restore balance. Harold's downfall exposed the dangers of greed and dishonesty, serving as a cautionary tale for others. Meanwhile, Marcus and Sarah demonstrated that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about healing, rebuilding, and moving forward with purpose. On the anniversary of their father's passing, Marcus and Sarah visited his grave together. They stood side by side, gazing at the simple headstone engraved with his name. "Dad would be proud of us," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. "I think so too," Marcus replied, smiling faintly. "We've honored his memory in the best way we know how, by helping others and staying true to ourselves." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above them, carrying with it a sense of peace. As they walked away, arm in arm, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the victories they had achieved, but for the lessons they had learned along the way. Life, he realized, was full of challenges, but it was also rich with opportunities to grow, connect, and make a difference. And so, with renewed hope and unwavering resolve, Marcus and Sarah stepped boldly into the future. Their father's legacy lived on, not in material wealth or possessions, but in the lives they touched and the values they upheld. Karma, in its mysterious yet inevitable way, had delivered justice, and in doing so, paved the way for a brighter tomorrow.